think we'll go ahead and get started. This webinar is being recorded, so if we have any other attendees or participants that join a couple minutes late, that's okay. So again, welcome to our Brownfields Grant Writing Training Webinar Series. It's never too early to start. Next slide. Today is webinar 4, where we will be taking a deeper dive into the community need and community engagement section of the grant guidelines. Next slide. A few quick just reminders for today's webinar. If you lose your connectivity or have other issues during today, please dial 785-200-7005 or send an email to chsr@ksu.edu, and we will do our best to try to get you reconnected or resolve some of the technical issues you're having. If for some reason that doesn't work, again, this presentation is being recorded, so it will be available in the future after today's event. Next slide. And to be respectful of today's presenters as well as all participants, we do ask that you remain on mute and your video off just to limit any potential distractions during the webinar. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat box. If you signed up today and your name is something different than what you registered with, it would really help us out if you could rename and use the name that you registered for. You can do this by using the participants little icon in the toolbar. Click on more and rename yourself. This just helps us make sure that we can mark you as being attended so you can get your certificate for attending today's event. Next slide. During the webinar and the actual presentations, we do encourage all chats to come through, or all questions to come through the chat so we can make sure that we're getting those questions asked and answered. We probably will have some time at the end for some maybe verbal Q&A, and to do that, you can use the reactions button to raise your hand and we can call upon you and we can do some Q&A chat at the end. You can also email your questions to chsr@ksu.edu. Next slide. So what have we done with this series? Just kind of a quick recap for those that have attended all now 4 events, or just a quick reminder for those that were unable to participate. We kicked the series off on April 20th just to start talking about what is your capacity? Are you ready for one of these Brownfield grants? And what is your capacity to administer and manage a grant? And if not, how can you get there? We followed that with an overview of all the MARC grant kind of guidelines, who's eligible to apply, threshold. We had some great speakers from our friends up at EPA headquarters that talked about procurement and contractors. We also touched on some online tools that are available to help you throughout the grant process. And then last week, we dove deep into the project area description and plans for revitalization section and got to hear from some good experts. Some communities shared their examples of how they identified their geographic area, their target area. So hopefully all these things are very helpful to you all to get to thinking, starting this process early, because if you're an existing grantee or you've applied for one of these grants in the past, you do know it takes a lot. And so the intent of this webinar is just to really help you get started. Start thinking about what you can do now to gather the information and data that you need. As I mentioned, today we're going to cover the community need and community engagement section. And then the next 2 webinars will cover budget, tasks, programmatic capability, and then how to tie this all together. If you were unable to attend any of the past events or future events, no worries. We got you covered. All these webinars are being recorded and they will be available on the webinar webpage. Next slide. So here's today's agenda. I will kick things off with a quick overview of the community need and community engagement section. And I guess I should introduce myself. I am Maggie Bellinger. I am the Assistant Director and the Regional Manager for EPA Region 8 at the KSU TAB program. Then we're going to hear from Danielle Getzinger. She's going to take us through a deep dive into the EPA EJ screen and CJEST tools. And then we'll have an open panel discussion with Danielle and also Jason Seiler, the Montana DEQ Brownfields Coordinator, and Beth Grigsby, a Regional Manager for Region 5 here at KSU TAB, to share some additional resources and really talk about how you can use the data to address the criteria in this section. We'll also hear from Beth on identifying and leveraging your community and other partners, and then we'll have a final kind of Q&A and wrap up. Next slide. So what is the community needs section all about? Well, the community needs section is really identifying or expressing why do you need the money. In this section, you'll want to describe not only why you need the money and need the funds, but how those funds will meet the needs of your community. This section also asks for the identification and discussion of threats to sensitive populations. Sensitive populations could be minorities, children, elderly, and I'm not going to dive too much into this right now because that's what the rest of the presenters will be talking about today. But just know you'll need to identify your sensitive populations, their health, well-being, what are some risks that they are exposed to in the target area you have identified, as well as acknowledging any greater than normal incidences of disease or adverse health conditions, and how can grant funds go to promote environmental justice within your geographic and target areas. Next slide. This section also covers community engagement. It includes project involvement. Who are you going to involve in your project? What are the roles and responsibility of those partners? And when you engage the community, it's not just about telling them or working with them, but also really incorporating, listening to the community, how you're going to incorporate thoughts and ideas and shared information within your grant project. Again, I'm not going to talk much more because I really want to maximize time for our presenters and speakers that are going to take us on a deep dive into how you can address this criteria in your grant applications. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to our first presenter, Danielle.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the country. Let me start by presenting, and first, just giving you an introduction of who I am. My name is Danielle Getzinger. I am the CEO of CJEST and a TAB partner. And I have been working in Brownfields for many years, 15 plus years, and have been supporting TAB as well as a lot of the various applicants with grant applications. So I'm excited to dive deep into the data. In general, as you build up these stories, and I think one of the best pieces of advice that a EPA staff member gave during a training was, we really need these grant applications to really bring forward the story of need that community need. You really need to make people cry, and then you need to bring it back up at the end and address how you're going to make them stand up and applaud you. So we're trying to strike that balance of really understanding what that need is. And Brownfields grants typically are going in communities that have more than just brownfields. They have other disparities, whether it's economic, challenges or socioeconomic indicators of need, food insecurity, and various other things. It's, as we all know, being working in this field, it's intermingled and very complicated. So I'm going to present this, but I do want to do some live demos of some of these tools. So the Biden administration just recently, within the past year or so, created the CJEST tool, which stands for the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This tool is really meant to address just that there are communities that have been overburdened and overlooked for some time. And by looking at not just one indicator, but multiple indicators of what makes these census tracts disadvantaged. So that tool, I'm assuming, can you see, or is that the full screen, or is my face in the way at all?
Oh, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So it's just on my end. So that climate, that disadvantaged census tracts across all 50 states, District of Columbia, and the U.S. territories. This is intended to help federal agencies identify the disadvantaged communities, so that will benefit from programs including Justice 40 initiative. If you haven't heard of the Justice 40 initiative, that seeks to deliver 40% of overall benefits of investments in climate energy, clean energy in related areas of disadvantaged communities. So 40% of the funding, we have billions of dollars of funding coming out. I heard something like 3 billion just for EPA. And 40% of that is going to disadvantaged communities. So it is most definitely going to be part of the grant requirements to demonstrate if your community is disadvantaged, much in the way our previous grant applications have identified other initiatives under other administrations, like opportunity zones and promise zones. So the way that they define disadvantaged is really based on the census tract. And that would be, they're considered disadvantaged if that census tract or the census tracts are at or above the threshold for one or more of the environmental, climate, or other burdens, which I'll go through. If they're at or above the threshold for an associated socioeconomic burden, which they've defined, and is completely surrounded by disadvantaged communities, and those census tracts themselves are above the 50 percentile for low income. All federally recognized tribes are considered disadvantaged. So if you're a tribal community, you check that box immediately. So these are the categories of burden, and we can go into depth into this, and I'll bring up where to find all the details of what they mean by climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. And as you can see, the picture that I just brought in as an example under climate change is expected annual loss as a threshold. So if you're expected to lose agricultural crops because of climate change, that could put that community at a disadvantage. So one of the things I just want to, for all data, want to ground us in is an understanding of what we're using in terms of the data sources. And I think it is important to note that as you're pulling from a number of different sources, so you can do the CJEST tool, you might go straight to the census, you might be having the EJ screen, which we'll talk about as well. There's slight differences on where they're pulling the data. So for example, if you go to the census data and you're pulling a population and then you go to another tool and there's a difference, understand why. In the CJEST tool, they're using the census tract boundaries from 2010. And there may have been some changes between 2010 and 2020, but they are using 2010. I believe the EJ screen is using an updated standard. Most data sources range from the 2015 to 2019. I didn't see many that were beyond that. And then they do not necessarily include the full 2020 census data that was recently done. They're using the 5-year survey. Again, these are not necessarily issues. They're just something to note in terms of any kind of discrepancies between data. That is also important to note that the 2020 range there with the 5-year American community survey does not include any changes due to COVID. So just make a mental note of that. And I also want to emphasize local knowledge is essential to validate or give context to this data. The data is not perfect, and the local lived experience and expertise there is certainly needed to either validate or complement. So let me escape out of this and head into the CJEST tool. So immediately I can drop that in the chat. I can do that later. But this is the landing page for CJEST. And if you want to explore in this map, scroll down the map. It's all very user friendly, I found. Obviously, what is highlighted here are the disadvantaged communities. Up here, you have options to explore map. Methodology, that's where you understand what data they're using, some more details about what they mean by disadvantaged because of climate change, disadvantaged because of energy, housing, health, and all of those indicators. This is, again, just a good place for context if you have any questions, you want to dive a little bit deeper. And also where they're pulling information from. Climate risk, data access, this lead tool, so there's the lead energy, places data, that's going to come up later on. So some of them are multiple. I know EJ Screen is also one of the data sources. So sometimes going and doing a little bit deeper dive and going into that data beyond identifying and defining that this is a disadvantaged community, but then weaving in that story. Why is it disadvantaged? What's the data telling us? You can download the data if you want to get fancy. And there are some previous versions. The About section can tell you a little bit more about this tool and what its intentions are. Most of this I summarized on those slides, so you should be good. So if we were to go into scroll down here. I'm going to just zoom into Houston where I am right now. And it's an easy scroll in and you can see this is also be helpful if you're still debating whether or not, what target area you're going to select. This could be a make or break factor because I'm sure there's going to be additional points that are going to be assigned if you're in a disadvantaged community. So we'll just zoom into where my office is right here. West or east of downtown. And as you can see on the side, we have a summary of the data. So this is this census tract, the population, total population within that census tract. You can see some of this data. Again, this is being pulled from the census. And so they're presenting it in one way. We have why this is a vulnerable community due to climate change. And if we scroll down, and again, that local context is going to be really important. So one, we do know that this is a low income neighborhood, but we also know that there's risk for building loss. And we saw that during Hurricane Harvey, Winter Storm Uri. So kind of the local context here is validating that, yeah, no, that makes sense. We are expecting population loss due to injuries and results of all that. So those are, especially that 96th percentile, that's fairly high. And what they're the threshold that they're looking for is above 65, above 90, above 90. So we hit that here in the building loss. So explore this data and kind of scroll up and down right here, but you are going to need to build out your story more and go get some more data. So with that, and I'm happy, during the panel to answer any questions and dive back into these from what I have learned so far. The next, going into here, let's go into EJ Screen. So many of you are probably familiar with EJ Screen. It is a popular tool. It has been around for a while. And they just updated. We are on version 2.0, I believe. And there's some great features now with EJ Screen. Some of the additions and what they've added have been the health disparities data, the overlap with the climate change, critical service gaps, and I find that this toolbar is a little bit more user-friendly. So again, if you're looking for your target area still, going into EJ Screen and looking and finding where communities have needs and are vulnerable relative to their proximity to various various different indicators. So those indicators is really around air pollution, the PM 2.5 and ozone, around cancer risk using the NADA data, traffic proximity, Superfund proximity, et cetera. So you can go in and start to look at it from that high level. And again, I just want to flag where they're getting that census data from. It is from the 5-year estimate from the American Community Survey, and that was pre-COVID. So if there has been, say, for example, a sharp decline in a neighborhood due to evictions, due to death, we did lose a lot of people during COVID. That is something that you can flag and say, here's what the census data says. However, we know that this percentage of people moved from the neighborhood, or a large part of people were impacted because of COVID, and the demographics have changed. So from here, let me go into the tool itself. Okay, well, I just zoomed right in again to, let me redo this. So seeing where we were going, I was playing right before. So you can zoom into just about any place within, you also have an address. So you can zoom in like I did before, or you can type in our address, Canal Street, Houston, Texas. Boom. So if you know an address, if you're saying doing a cleanup grant, you will know the address of that, and you'll be able to zero in right there. If you're doing a full target area, I'll show you how to do that. But let's start with where we're looking at. From here, you have all of the different options for the US, compared to the US or compared to the state. So the way that EJ Screen presents their data is based on percentiles. So are you more, worse off or better based off of the statistical average? Details about that, we get a lot of questions about what is a percentile, and details about that can be found within this main, landing page for EJ Screen. So you can go into, what is EJ Screen? There's a video, there's a deep dive. Here's information on the indicators. There's also a technical, EJ Screen, technical information about EJ Screen, goes into a good explanation about, and that is right here, goes into a great explanation about what all of the back end, the methodology for creating EJ Screen. So if you want to go into find percentiles, we're going to go to page 31. Goes over the indices, the data, where they're pulling the data from, and into the percentiles, which, close your eyes, I'm going to scroll. We're going to go to page 31. Percentiles. Okay, so what is a percentile? So this has a great explanation of what a percentile means, how they're using it, how they're color coding it. In summary, 50th percentile is average. Anything above 50 is more than average, and the indicators that I typically look for are that to show disparity are in the 80th to 90th plus percentile. It is all relative to where you are in the country, relative to the state, relative to the US, but this is how we are able to kind of normalize the data and say that this, based off of the US average or the state average, there are far more Superfund sites in this area. And combined with that, there are more people of low income status relative to those Superfund sites. So both of those combined create that high percentile for sensitive populations exposed to those issues. So if we bring that into practical terms, here's how it displays on the map. And for the grant specifically, we can also come into pollution sources. If you click on any of this, it's an interactive map. So I would encourage you to just play around with this. What I typically do when I go into the EJ report, let me turn off this. I immediately, when I'm writing these reports, I go over here to tools and no, I'm sorry, I go to reports, which is kind of a tool. And one, you can do a drop pin. So I could have done a drop pin right there on my property, on my office, and we'll name this work. Right, so we can add that to the map. We can put a 1 mile buffer around it or no buffer. We can add that to the map and say, okay, that's our target area, say for a cleanup here. And you have all of these options for summary reports. You have the just basic report here that's showing the environmental justice indicators, pollution sources, socioeconomic indicators like, the demographic index, the people of color, low income, unemployment, and then other supplemental indicators or indices, underground storage tanks, wastewater discharge, etc. You can print that report. A lot of times when I'm working on the grant, I will come in here. The first thing I'll do is I'll print these reports to the file that I'm operating out of as a reference point to keep coming back to. It's going to take forever to load because we're live. Okay, so while that's loading, the other thing you can do, there's also this is your demographics report. And that loaded pretty quickly. This may not be all of the demographic information that you want. You might want more, but this is a good starting place of the demographic information that can be used to support your grant. You will need population, population density, the people of color, the percentage. So we're in a high minority neighborhood. We have land area. That's often helpful to say, this is within this is going to be a 1 mile radius, but total population, again, broken down into, who is living here, as well as the population, the age. We have educational attainment. We have linguistic isolation, household income. Those are some of the basics of what we would include in all of the grants. And is this one, this one loaded? So this one here shows the percentile versus the average throughout the state versus the average throughout the US in this area. So right here at my office, we can see that we are, we're almost in the 90th percentile for particulate matter. Now we're in the above 90 for the diesel particulates, fairly high in terms of just air quality in general. We have some risk management facilities nearby, hazardous waste facilities. That makes sense where we are. Discharge, underground storage tanks, we're still fairly high. So those are just things that demonstrate kind of those disparities. Okay, and now the other way that you can do it, which is a popular way, let me delete this one. Delete this site. So another way that you can do it is you can draw an area. So if you are not following specific census tracts and you just want to say this whole area you want to draw, it's as simple as doing that with this polygon tool. So I want to say, I want to capture everything in this quadrant that is defined not by the census tract, but by the interstates. So if we do that, we have that report. You can add a buffer onto that. You don't need to. And then you can do the same thing where you're exploring these reports and getting the data for that. The other way that you can do it, let's delete that. The other way you can do it is by selecting the block group or the census tract itself. So let's go back to my office. This census tract, right? No, that's not my census tract, but it's close enough. That's a census tract. You can explore the reports, etc. Same with the block groups, which are a little bit more detailed or a little bit finer scale, if you will. You can select the entire city. You can select the county. Both of those are helpful as you're building out tables, and I'll show you in a minute, as you build out tables of comparing this data, not only to the US and your state, but also the city and the county. But I was happy to see that those two were an option with the updates to EJ Screen. The other thing that you can do if you are bringing together multiple census tracts or block groups, multiple cities, that could be helpful if you are a regional government or perhaps just a couple of counties. But you can bring all of these together. So we'll just do it this way, where I just start clicking and it keeps adding to my. Apparently you can only do 5. Okay, I didn't know that, but now we all discovered that together. Okay, so we can only do 5. So you can do up to 5. If you're going to go beyond 5, you may want to draw that boundary, but we can submit that. And we have a weirdly shaped target area here, and you can still go through and explore those reports. And the EPA has done the math for us to aggregate that data into one report that represents that area. So that is what this weird area looks like there. And again, I would print this to your kind of a research folder within your grant application working files. Those are the basics of EJ Screen as it relates to the grant application. And the use of that within your grant. We kind of, I don't know if this is an official or unofficial. We used to be almost required to have tables within the grants. I still sprinkle tables throughout my grants, and if you go to the KSU tab website and you find other grant examples, you'll see that there's a lot of people still use tables because it's easy to do. But in general, I would use a table even if you're going to reference some of that information within a text format within your grant. Tables do take up a whole lot of space, so you can write this out or you can provide a comparison table. But we are wanting to demonstrate kind of what those disparities are relative to the state and the city of Houston, or the city, or wherever you are. This target area for this grant was based off of zip codes. But as you can see in the next slide, we brought in, because the census tracts, sometimes when you get down to a granular level, the census tracts can tell a more detailed story versus what the whole target area is about. And we found that to be the case, especially in neighborhoods. If we were in an urban area, in neighborhoods that are undergoing gentrification and changes in the demographics. So we selected specific target areas around some of the priority sites to tell more of that story, to really to demonstrate through the data that there was need within the communities. And this is how, if you are going to use a table, how we've referenced it within the text. Real quick, Maggie, if I have some time before we go into a panel, I will walk through a few of the other data. EJ Screen and the CJEST tool are only a couple places to go. US Census data you certainly want to get to. But here's a couple of examples of where you can go for health data, which is often some of the hardest to find. But the CDC has some great tools out there.
Before we move on to some of this, we did have a question in the chat, and I don't know if you can answer this. One of the participants was following along with you when you were in EJ Screen, and they received an error message when they selected the city. Have you ever encountered, I guess, errors when you're working within the tool?
I do.
And do you have any tricks?
Refresh.
Yeah.
Refresh. Try a different internet connection, refresh. And if it's still a problem, I know that one of our KSU tab providers, Cynthia Annette, is a frequent email the developers of the tool, and she gets some great results. I mean, they have these feedback buttons for a reason, and I'm trying to find that one. If you're having trouble, there is a help up in this corner, which probably takes you to nothing good. No, nothing good. Don't click on that one. But if you go to EJ's screen, they have, and what is EJ screen? Oh, just EJ screen home. Let's go there. They have office hours, regular office hours and trainings. So I would give them a call and say, this keeps crashing on me. Why does this keep crashing on me? And just because it shouldn't. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions while I'm?
No other questions.
Okay. So with the health data, again, we go to there. The US Census data has become far more user-friendly. I find when there's a map interface, it becomes a little bit easier. There's some great tutorials on the US Census data website. And again, these tools have made it a lot easier to be able to get the data. FEMA, the National Risk Index, is another place to go and I think that CJEST actually refers back to this. So this is another great place to build up that story and understand what the risks are, both, just the risk index in general. That was like a accumulation of everything, but expected annual loss, social vulnerability, and neighborhood resilience. They define that in various ways. EnviroAtlas is another place to go. I'm finding that this one requires a little bit more, I'm going to say patience, because it's a little bit more technical, but within EnviroAtlas, it is a really powerful tool, and you can get a lot of the same data out of this platform as well. Their vulnerability, the FEMA, of course, their national hazards layer viewer. There's this is a great website to go to, the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, because we know that climate and resilience and all of that is going to be something the EPA is looking to address through the Brownfields program and through their Justice 40 initiative. We know that because it ties back to the EPA strategic plan and all of the mandates for this funding. The U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit is a great place to go to find other tools. So they have a search bar for more tools, and some of those are on a state level. So I'd encourage you to check that out, as well as the USGS. And in general, just some of that inequity data that we are looking for is the disproportionate exposure to environmental contamination. And as you can see, as my friend here down in Northeast Houston, we have an identified cancer cluster, which is absolutely part of all of our initiatives to try to in some way address through the Brownfields program, even if that is providing a local brownfields to health clinic, or brownfields to a park system, something that will help with the chip away at these disparities. This is from the city of Austin, and there was a great study done there locally, which I think actually originated in Portland, Oregon, about the changes in population and any kind of vulnerability to displacement. So look for some of those studies to complement. There's food and nutrition insecurity data from the USDA. I just talked about that one. The displacement due to climate factors, that will be in CJEST as well. Access to health care, just access, right? Access to all of the things. If a community is lacking, a health clinic, or a community is lacking access to housing, where is that documented? It may be documented locally at the city level or within studies. A lot of university studies also show that data. This is the USDA food desert atlas, which is tracking low income and low access to healthy food and more resilience. You'll find that there's a ton of different options. And again, I just want to reiterate, go back, where are they getting the data? What is the original source of that data? And how does that help you put that into context and bring to light any discrepancies that you might see, and also pull in that local knowledge and that the lived experience of the communities. This is not, and I saw this in the environmental justice grants that just came out, and I wouldn't be surprised if they look for it in the Brownfields grants as well. They are actually asking for quotes from the community, voices of the community, which can be really great, especially if you're either a rural community or you just don't have a robust data set. Pull in what the community is saying. That qualitative data is still data and is often not elevated to where it should be, but it can be very powerful in storytelling. Anyway. That's what I'm happy to do a deeper dive, Maggie, but we'll step back and let you do a panel.
Okay, yeah, I think that's great. But yeah, let's go ahead and Jason Seiler with Montana, EPA Brownfields, and then Beth Grigsby. That was great information, Danielle. I would like to start off by asking, I guess, you, Jason, you work with a lot of rural communities within your state and other areas. Do you have any helpful resources or tools that you often find are helpful when you're preparing or gathering data for these type of grants?
Yeah, yes. So there's a lot of like Danielle just said, there's a ton of information out there, but it is very daunting when especially if this is your first go through or your first rodeo in the grants. Is like, where do you begin? Mm-hmm. And trying to gather all that information. And I think what is key is finding those local partnerships that have maybe already applied for similar grants, or say a local economic development authority or local county public health department, someone like that at that local level that has been applying for, say, whether it's Department of Health grants or USDA grants or any of these grants. They've been asking similar questions for a long time. And so not starting from scratch is kind of my biggest recommendation, because there's a wealth of information out there, especially at least in Montana, the local economic development associations have been doing a phenomenal job in applying for these grants for a number of years. So one of the things I did want to kind of point out, and I can share my screen, and I have kind of and Danielle covered some of these, like the ATSDR, but essentially there's health, kind of the things that you want to try to figure out is like kind of all your health issues, and then your economic issues, and then seeing where those kind of join, and and then getting back to the telling your story. How is your Brownfields grant going to help kind of alleviate these two issues? So, because they're the two big ones that take a lot of time and yet take up a very little real estate in your application, because real estate is precious in those applications, but yet you need to kind of define that. There's a lot of new mappers out there that are phenomenal. I wish they would have been there when I was started originally writing these grant applications, because they've cut out a lot of the kind of the legwork. The Justice 40 mapper is one of those. It provides a ton of information, and if you download all of it and then just sift through it, that is huge. EJ Screen, like Danielle said. Another one that we use often is the headwaterseconomics.org. It is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research group. It's based in Montana, but they cover the entire country. They provide kind of unique examples of demographics. They provide populations at risks, socioeconomic trends, and other key indicators. And it's a pretty easy to use web mapper that I found. If I can do it, it's pretty simple. You go to their webpage, Headwaters Economics, you click on the tool icon, and then just enter a community, let's say Harlowton, and it provides both city and county. If you want to compare that, say you're trying to do 3 different target communities, you can add communities. We'll do Lewistown, Montana. So you can actually add that, and they'll provide some quick facts, but then you can also look at, what are the populations at risks, and it will compare those communities that you've added. It's really nice because it does provide you with information on, let's population at risk is one. It provides you with data that's not often found, or at least I haven't been able to find. How do I get that? There we are. Populations, they'll shade it for you. So say that there's information that they don't have a lot of confidence in, but for community of Harlowton, it's 1,000 people. It's like, well, no one's been deep diving economic data or population data in the community of Harlowton ever. But they do have some information like this, people in deep poverty, or people in deep poverty over the age of 65, where they actually have some of these kind of harder to find, but yet can help tell that story. So that's why I throw them out there, is because it's kind of a nice tool that way. There's also, like, again, I said, local economic development organizations. And then there is this, I've used PolicyMap before as well, policymap.com. It is a for-profit, so you do have to pay for it. But again, if you're not finding exactly the right data, maybe it's worth it to try it out. Or if you know someone that has an account, maybe you can try it out just to see if it's worth getting into. As far as the health side of things, I really, again, try to focus on the local side of things, seeing if your city or county is already reaching out to the local health departments, seeing if they've already done a community health survey. There's a great webpage on National Environmental Public Health Tracking Network. That's a fantastic, it's similar, it's a web mapper. Again, if I knew that it was available before, it helps visualize data. You can search on all of these different COVID, asthma, cancer, childhood cancers, lead poisonings. They kind of give you the gamut, and you can drill it down to your community level or county level, state level, just to kind of make your argument. And it's a fantastic resource. The ATSDR is another one that also does that. And then kind of one last thing I would recommend is reaching out to both your county epidemiologist and or your state epidemiologist. They are writing all of these grants as well. They do national grants all the time. looking at specific kind of concerns and reaching out to them is like, hey, I've got this community. What do you do? What have you written about this? And using the data that they've already developed. That's because it's a lot, and start early. I guess that's the other one. It takes a while to kind of digest it all. With
Great.
that, I'll stop.
What about you, Beth? Do you have any more to add?
Well, I've used the, as you mentioned, the health department, but also the hospitals. Many times you have hospitals and they have community needs assessment, or they have community health needs assessments that you can locate. And typically you find these, every at least county has a hospital. So you can get more data that way. I'm trying to think if there's any other, that's my go-to for health. I look at cancer.org. I look at the Cancer Association, what's prevalent. But I think what Danielle has already brought up are many of the tools that those are my go-tos.
Okay, great, thank you. And Jason, if you, at the end of this, if you could share me your slides, that would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, now here's some good questions for our panelists. So you have all these amazing resources out there for all of this data. That's great. How do you use that data and incorporate it into your grant proposal to address the criteria? And nobody, speak at once, but do you have any good tips? Because it is a lot. I think, Danielle, you touched on it. Jason, you did too. So what are some maybe tips, or what have you done in the past once you've gathered all this data? How do you really incorporate that into your narrative to help tell your community needs story?
So I could start. One of the things that I start with is understanding why I need the data. So what is the story that we're trying to tell? And it's always a story that should lead it, and the data should reinforce it. So I'm not going to bring up food insecurity data if that's not what we're trying to address in this. What I am going to bring up, if we have a housing focus and affordable brownfields to affordable housing, I'm going to focus in my data on all of the reasons and all of the data that backs disparities within that, some of the social determinants of health that may come from the housing insecurity, but really understand the story you're trying to tell, and then all of the data that will reinforce that and really elevate the importance of it. And sprinkle it throughout. Go ahead.
Yeah, sprinkle it throughout. And I was going to say, and also when you've got your revitalization plan and you're talking about the difference you're going to make, that data can reinforce some of the things that you're talking about that will improve in the area. Like housing is a good example, greenways, trails. So that if you can sprinkle it through the narrative, I think it's really important to bolster the story, as you said.
Absolutely. I agree with that. It's figuring out where you want to go and then how to build your case backwards. And if one that I wrote one time was about a large open space for a small community, and they don't have it's a very small community. And so they don't have a ton of medical assistants or medical providers. And so in saying that argument, this green space was kind of more of a preventative remedy for the community, because it will attract recreational uses, increase activity levels. And these are all preventative measures because they don't have that medical establishment, the traditional medical establishment. And so it's a stretch, yeah, but I think it told a good story of a small community making good with what they had, and I think that's what everybody's trying to do, is make those connections.
Great, thank you. So that kind of segues a little bit into my next question is, what do you do if the data doesn't necessarily fit your exact project? What do you use, or how do you still address the criteria? That was a great example, Jason, that you gave, but maybe other rural communities, or, the census tract, just maybe, or even some of the data way beyond the geographic area or the target area that you've identified. Could be one. And then, what if you're an affluent community or neighborhood, but you still have brownfields and you still have, issues that need to be addressed? What are some tips or things you've seen or done in the past to still write a competitive, section when the data, you either can't find it or it's just not quite the right fit?
I'm happy to go first again, but Jason, you would look like you were gonna.
No, go for it.
Well, I was just gonna say, kind of coming back to what is that local context? What is the community saying? And really driving with that. And if you say, the data within EJ screen is just not right. We were working with a tribal community, and they, the EJ screen said they were in the 95th percentile for Superfund, and I asked, are there Superfunds nearby? No. So sometimes you could just throw out the data, but other times you could, and we've had this in Houston where the data wasn't telling the story because the demographics had changed, because there was a change it was a gentrifying neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that there weren't still reasons to. There were probably more reasons why we needed to redevelop the brownfields for the local, original owners and residents here, so we could, help them stay. And instead of, throwing out the data or even using it as is, we gave the context of this data has changed over time. It's not representative of this population. So we told the story, we gave context. It's like we submitted the data with an asterisk. Said, this is what the source says. However, we understand that there's a difference here. We understand that this census tract boundary is much bigger, and we're really focusing on this section. And this is what the community is saying in this area.
Yeah, I think I kind of look at things like there are community action programs, even in the smallest areas, right? Where they serve the general public, childcare, Head Start, that type of thing. But when I would then focus on the brownfield itself and the brownfield and the impacts on that local community. And the brownfield impacts could be something like an unsafe building, unsafe property. The kids are getting into this. There's a lot of fires. Well, it's still a problem. And maybe you're not seeing health impacts now, but eventually you may be seeing health impacts from releases from the environment. And, that impacts the community. You have also, sediment in the air from contaminated soils. You could have, your creeks and streams being contaminated. So I think I would go with that focus and focus about what the site is, who is impacted. And then the other piece of that is, okay, we're in a very affluent area according to the census tract, but guess what? We've got 3 or 4 blocks here that are mobile home parks. And they're not affluent. We don't really have that kind of data right now, but we can tell you about the conditions of those residents, and also look at the school details on that. How many of the kids in the proximal schools have to get subsidized lunches or free lunches? I know that's grabbing at things, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, Maggie, I'll add in on the your question about affluent. I'll address it from that. If you are not within a disadvantaged census tract, and you don't have that, I would stick to what is the purpose? What's your story of why you're redeveloping the brownfields, and not necessarily on the surrounding area, but is there a historic, preservation? Is there a way that this project here actually does bring a regional strength or a citywide strength that will address other populations that may be disadvantaged? So you can tie it in. I would also tie back to the EPA's strategic plan and what their objectives are, because at the end of the day, they're going to be going back to their strategic plan and saying, are we going to accomplish this with this money? Are we going to accomplish this? So if there's a big, say, a climate action, perhaps you're going to redevelop something for a solar farm, and that's going to help with the energy security throughout the city, or you're going to redevelop as a small business incubator, and that it just happens to be located on this side of town, but you're going to work with the local community colleges and high schools throughout the city. There could be a really great case for why you would put be a brownfields funding outside of a disadvantaged community and still align with the objectives of the EPA.
Yeah, I think we've done this a number of different places. One of the ones in Montana, we have large rural communities. The census tract is the entire county, and that doesn't tell you very much of anything, because they say, oh well, you're doing your median income is just fine, and that's true because you're incorporating all of the it's kind of the inverse, and we've explained this in grants before. It's the inverse of most normal cities, larger cities, where it's higher income. Downtown is more affluent, whereas in rural communities, it's actually outside of town is the more affluent, because you have the larger farmers, ranchers. They have the more money, whereas the small communities, it's those the old housing that has been there forever. Those are the people that actually don't have the funds or sufficient fundings. And what we focused on both there, as well as in some of we have some resort communities that we've looked at is affordability. What is the affordability of housing, and what is that demand? And is it an old community? Well, then maybe we're looking at the lead-based paint issues there, and providing new, clean, safe housing, affordable housing to both kind of these smaller rural communities, but also in the resort areas. The workers the people running the lift lines and everything else are going to have to live somewhere, and providing them with, instead of a kind of a dilapidated dwelling, let's provide them with safe, clean, affordable housing. So.
Yeah, and I think I see also property values are definitely impacted by brownfield sites. And that's another case you can make in terms of comparing one to the other, within the community.
Great, thank you. We're doing really pretty good on time. And we have a somewhat smaller group. So I'm going to open it up to our participants and see if anybody has a specific question that they would like to ask our panelists. You can unvideo yourself, or you can use the raise your hand and we can call on you if you have a specific question, or if you have something that you would just like to share based on your experience.
I was also going to mention that if anyone in any of the participants would like to see Danielle go back to work on one of the websites she was working with, and go to their community and take a look at what they find. I mean, that was just a thought too.
Yeah, well, I'm not seeing anything from anybody. So I think this was really great. I really appreciate this discussion because these are questions. The questions I asked you are questions we get as TAB a lot. So I appreciate all that. And we'll have another final Q&A at the end. So if participants, if you, oh.
I got a hot one here.
Yeah, Kalispell, Montana. Thank you, Catherine.
We're going to Montana, everybody. Hold on. Okay. Where are we going? Let's go. Let's start here. Okay. Boom. Montana. There we go. So you have, I see a couple of options for target areas. Let me scroll in here. Feel free to come off mute if you want. What do we got going on? That
Yeah.
looks like-
Oh, wow.
Thank you for picking that area. That is within my city limits, and so that's helpful.
What kind of natural disasters do you have that are potentially going to make your population decline? Fire?
Yes. I mean, it can be anyone's fire though, right? It can come from California or Canada.
Okay, so yeah, so that's really what's driving that one, the climate change, and then low income in those areas. You have air issues. Is there anything in that area that would increase PM 2.5, or is it that maybe just calculated through the proximity to the interstates?
Jason, help me out, but I don't think there's anything in that area that would generate.
I think it's the fact that you have the highways coming right through downtown. It's the intersection of two highways, state highways, as well as kind of a byway around that. So I think that high traffic count is definitely a driver there.
Okay, so in terms of health, doesn't look like that's affecting health quite as much. Most people I know in Montana are fairly healthy, with all your mountains there.
So I think that's an interesting point. I think that most people imagine that you're in Montana or in a relatively rural part of Montana particularly, and assume that we all have all this great fresh air. But in point of fact, like we're in a valley, and so
It kind of comes down.
yeah, so it tends to come in and get stuck here. And so you mentioned like wildfires, per se, we don't necessarily have a lot of wildfires, certainly in the city or in its immediate area. But again, we have a tremendous experience in the last several years of the smoke from other states and the provinces coming and settling into our valley and having really dramatic effects on our air quality, particularly in the summer, late summer, August, September.
This is an awesome example of how you need to pull in that local context, because a reviewer in Texas is going to say, oh, the brilliant air of Montana, you guys are all healthy and fit and running the mountains, right? But knowing that no, we've got those valleys, and that does happen. If you have, and I've even referenced news stories in reports before, taking a quote out of a news story in a particular time where the air quality was really bad, I would pull that in, because just because this is saying that the asthma isn't bad right now, according to these health statistics, maybe this is blatantly just wrong, but also maybe there is still a risk of increasing that asthma because of these wildfires that are more persistent. So weave that in to that story, especially if your downtown area with a vulnerable low-income population is going to be exposed to that. This is where you really have to pull in that story, right?
I think another aspect that I wasn't thinking about, but the PM 2.5 is a lot of wood in Montana. You think of mountains and trees, and there's a lot of wood burning stoves and a lot of old wood burning stoves. And it's typically the lower population that they don't have the funds to use that thermostat in their furnace. So they're going to go out and saw wood, and just the effects of wood burning stoves in households and the increases of exposure to that alone is significant.
Yeah, don't discount that. I grew up in northern New Hampshire with a wood burning stove. Probably why I have the issues I have today. But absolutely. And then of course you know, legacy pollution, you know, check that abandoned mine land, probably not in downtown, but you know, if
That's a really good point, and I appreciate you touching on it now and earlier. Again, you know, I love these screens, but I really hesitate because I see things that are just blatantly not correct. And then that sort of makes me question everything I see. And it's frustrating in a rural community because I rely on that data. I need that data. And when I can tell you I don't have an abandoned mine right close, I mean, okay, well, we could say we have an old gravel pit, and I guess that counts as a mine, but you know, even proximity to Superfund sites, I don't have that. And so then it makes me nervous about the rest of what's here.
so first, I mean, you're right to question everything. That is how, since I've been working with data and have formed a company based on data science, we question everything, everything. And there's never going to be perfect data. And the more rural you get, this data becomes more and more unreliable. But one thing that you do need to understand is that the EPA knows that. So if you put that into that, if you write that in there that says, no, this data doesn't demonstrate this, however, we are in a rural community and your data is wrong. And call them out on them, and they know. I mean, that is a valid argument. This is a benchmark to go off of. And again, if this is not telling your story, you know, the underground storage tanks, you have a lot of releases on underground storage tanks.
Yeah.
You know, that does tell a story. That's a inventory right there. Right. So yeah, feel free to go. I encourage everybody to go rogue, and making sure that you're questioning the data. And even the tools that we've developed, we have not tried to cover up the inaccuracies. We've tried to show them, because we, you know, the EPA knows that this is not perfect, and that you cannot, you know, just because it's not in the data doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that the data has not yet been documented. Right. So this is an opportunity to document some of that. And you may need to lead more with a qualitative, you know, data front than this quantitative with a large error bar.
I have a question on this, and maybe Jason, you can help me with this piece, but how about the county health rankings? Does that not play a factor? Does that not work for communities like this? Or have you used county health rankings?
We use, yes, we have, and we look at, and I think that's when Catherine was asking these questions about the data and what's flagged over here. That's why I use multiple different resources, because just because this one says no, there's not the PM10 or 2.5 issue, maybe another one might, or it may show, oh, actually in your actual local hospital data will show the inventory of, or the amount of cases coming into your community hospital due to emergency room visits for asthma could actually show up there. So I think it's good to check in multiple sources and use the data that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, even looking at this with the PM 2.5, it's showing it over here and over here. And on this map, we're only looking at here. So
Right.
yeah, multiple sources of data.
Mm-hmm.
multiple lines of evidence, including that qualitative.
Can you look at health disparities, or would we have already seen that on CJEST?
So
Like
this is
heart
the life
disease?
expectancy, this is heart disease. And now that asthma, I believe we probably would have seen this on the CJEST.
Yeah, okay.
From the same sources. You know, we can go into, I don't know what kind of time we have, Maggie, but let me,
I think we can keep going with this for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll switch over to partners.
okay. Now I'm put on the spot, so I gotta find the interactive map. Good thing it was easy. Okay, so this. Please no, okay, okay. Search. Find place. Boom. Okay. So that was arthritis.
Hmm.
Let's go with the asthma. Oh, we gotta read. Oh no, we're good. So this is the asthma report from the CDC. We were looking at that track, but we're looking at the whole city. So this is another, you know, it goes beyond what the EJ screen is showing, with just asthma. What was the other ones that they were showing? They were showing some other things, diabetes, I think, and heart disease. So you can explore here. And with all of this, as you're making the reference, I usually do it, the source as a footnote of where we're getting the data, to not take up too much space within your text, but note where you're getting the data. And again, this is government funding and government tools and government data. So they should, you know, if you're using their tools, they want to know it's a reputable source, even if it is flawed. And those reputable sources, if they are the you know, EPA sources, they are CDC, FEMA, they're not going to scrutinize that. If you say, you know, there was a study done by a high school student that showed this, well, maybe it was a really good one, but we're going to want some reputable sources.
Great. Thank you. That was a really great point. Yeah, always cite your sources. So, all right. Well, thank you, Danielle, Jason, Beth. I hope you guys can hang on, because like I said, we might have some additional Q&A at the end of the webinar. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to you, Beth. And Dana, if you can pull up our slides, that would be great. And we will talk about community engagement and partnering and what that looks like.
Okay. Well, hi there. I'm Beth. I'm the regional manager for EPA Region 5. My background is, well, municipal experience for about almost 10 years, community development for 2 years at a nonprofit level, consultant for too many years, and now I'm with the TAB program. I've been affiliated with the TAB program, though, since really 2002. And know it well and have been a partner for years and years. And now I actually work for KSU TAB. So I've written a lot of grant applications in my days with the municipality, as well as with consulting and nonprofit. And so kind of understand where you're coming from. My presentation is really going to be more about, it's qualitative. It's not going to be quantitative. So bear with me. We're just going to talk about what's going to help you. Next slide, please. So community engagement, and actually this whole community engagement piece, these are the things you can do right now. These are some action items that if you're looking to really, you know, write a solid grant application, you need to understand what the need is, and you need to understand who your community is. And parts of the application are going to address things like project involvement, the project roles, incorporating community input. Very important. It really could have begun yesterday in your efforts to secure a grant. This criteria may look stingy in points when you start looking at the evaluation and you start seeing the point spread. That's one thing. It's stingy on points, but it's mighty when it comes to really developing the story, communicating the story. It's the heart of the Brownfields program, really. Next slide, please. So project involvement, this is the general criteria. You always have to look for the nuances in each type of application, but you identify your local organizations, you have project roles, how are the partners under project roles involved in making decisions? Not just being informed, making decisions with respect to cleanup and future reuse of the brownfield sites. Incorporating community input. This is your plan, and this is a plan you start constructing now. That would be me if I were in your shoes. And with multi-purpose grants only, you really are looking at, you have an additional criteria, prior and ongoing community involvement. That's just additional criteria you'll have to address. Next slide, please. So project involvement, considerations when selecting partners. You know, in the beginning, you're really identifying who wants to be involved, who would be an important entity to have here. Well, the first thing I always look at the project, and that might be, maybe that's just my approach, but I look at the project and where it's at. I look at the project and what the vision is. So when you're looking for partners, you're considering partners, what are they going to bring to the table for your grant project? Will they bring resources, outreach assistance, links to the communities in your target areas? What expertise can they provide? Well, it could be, the statistics and that type of thing. It could be actual dollars, but it also could involve their knowledge of the community, the history of the community, the culture of the community. Will they enhance your community involvement activities? Very, very important. You really need to have someone that can talk the talk in the community. There's nothing worse than having outsiders come in to a neighborhood and tell them how things should be. You need to listen, and you need to listen and be patient and listen more. How can they help you be a champion for your Brownfields project? Well, I think you have to energize them by involving them in the project. Next slide, please. So here's a laundry list, okay? This is not what the EPA wants. They don't want a laundry list, okay? If you're creating jobs, right, you actually think this brownfield site that could be purchased by someone that is putting in a manufacturing facility or even adding to an existing facility. Who do you bring to the table? You think like workforce development partners, possibly, economic development associations, those chambers of commerce, things to help this grant move along. But of course, again, look at where you're at. Who do you reach out to? Maybe it's not a neighborhood. Maybe you're reaching out to the local businesses in the area, the local manufacturing companies. So these are important when identifying your partners. If you're creating, let's say, commercial reuse, retail reuse, look at SBA, Small Business Association, the USDA. If housing, consider housing agencies. Consider what the neighborhood wants. Consider those community action programs I've mentioned, how they can get the word out. So another really underlooked or underrated resource is the fire department, because they have knowledge of, they do emergency response plans. So they have knowledge of what kind of chemicals might be on a site that now you're working on, right? Or is adjacent to what you're working on. And also they just have a really good understanding of any calls to the sites, any issues, particularly when it comes to safety for the area. Are there fires there? Or, you know, what's going on with the site? So where are your sites? How did you even identify these sites to start? That's always a good question. Who did the sites impact? How do they impact? And who has a vested interest in the development of the site? Who wants to know what's going on? Next slide, please. So partners need to be relevant to site selection, cleanup, and future redevelopment of the sites. The quality of your partners, much more important than the quantity. I saw a grant application that wasn't selected from funding year 22 with probably 14 partners. But it didn't make sense with the story. It was just like, okay, you put the laundry list down, you check the box, next. So that's something to consider. And in funding year 23, this last grant round, assessment and multipurpose grants, if they didn't involve at least one relevant community-based organization or community liaison representing the residents directly affected by the project work, they were going to be evaluated less favorably. So identify. You can identify a community liaison, or you can identify a leader in the area, but I think it's important to have those folks involved. Next slide, please. So here's some examples I've put together on projects, partners, and if you go to, let's say, across this, what you see here is a site name, you see a targeted area, the vision, planning document, leveraging resources. How are they going to fund the project? Who's going to chip in? Because EPA money is seed money. EPA money is just the beginning. You really have to think towards the future of leveraging that EPA funding for redevelopment. Community-based organizations and liaisons, and just some notes. So the Tokheim site is one. It was vacant, blighted site. They want to do city housing. So who are their leveraging resources? Well, you see the city's going to be involved. They're going to purchase the property and do infrastructure improvements. That's huge. That needs to be noted in the application. Tax credits for the housing. State opportunity zone resources. It was in an opportunity zone. And those community-based organizations, take a look. We're talking about a neighborhood association. We've got Hope Foundation for Environmental Justice involved. You have a community action program involved, county health department, housing development partner, state brownfields program. Don't underlook your state brownfields program or your tribal brownfields program in terms of being a partner. So that's one approach. Got another here at the gas station on a greenway corridor. They want it to be a coffee shop. It's got tanks, it needs demolition. Again, you've got the city chipping in for demolition. They have community development block grant funds for that. Small business loan. That's another way to fund the project or fund the redevelopment. The state UST cleanup program, definitely a leverage resource. And then you have the neighborhood, the grade schools involved. This is a great way to get the partners, or not partners, get the family and the parents involved in this process, if their kids are involved, and a Greenway Commission. And then it goes on and on here. I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but I think these are things to consider. Make your project, develop partners that really truly relate to the success of your project. to the success of your redevelopment, and you'll do fine. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of partners and roles, because you don't just identify a partner, you have a role. And here's another project, the dumping salvage yards on a riverfront. And they want to redevelop this site. So they have a conservancy involved, the Greenway Commission involved, the elementary school that is adjacent to this area. They're gonna be involved, regional state chamber. They're gonna market the park redevelopment. They're gonna provide updates regarding the park development progress. The Kiwanis International Club, they're gonna provide meeting space, project outreach to their constituents, which is very important. It's another way to get the message out. State Brownfields program. Skip down, let's say, to the former historic industrial facility. Oh, this is another neighborhood, very disadvantaged, Hispanic neighborhood, community action program. Very important, because they're going to assist with community awareness, project updates, because people want to know about future housing choices. ABC Housing Development, and they are going to acquire tax credits for historic preservation, housing development for tax credits, property remediation. They're actually piling all of the remediation into their tax credit application, and then they'll be doing the redevelopment. The Hispanic Church provides meeting spaces, outreach, notice about project meetings, interpreters, and translation of outreach documents. Again, I find these things very compelling. And of course, historic preservation. They will help assist the developer to meet the preservation guidelines. Next slide, please. So, if you've not been a person that's typically engaged in community, this is time to start exploring who in your organization or what partner can help you that's used to doing these types of things. I don't think outreach should be contrived. I really don't. I think it should be based on normal schedules, normal outreach schedules, in terms of this is something that happens periodically. You have community meetings, right? Or you have other venues that maybe not neighborhood meetings, but community gatherings. You have, let's say in a rural setting, you have the 4-H club, you have community fairs. So incorporating community input is putting your plan together. So you have to describe your plan for the affected community during the planning and implementation of your project, and how you will keep them engaged. Don't forget, of course, the social distancing and everything that we've learned due to COVID. Have you engaged the public in the past? What were the successful approaches and methods? I mean, I knew a mayor that he would give a bi-weekly address on the radio, the local radio. He would talk about his Brownfield project probably every 2 months. He'd be talking and giving updates. Maybe it's a local newspaper. Maybe it's Facebook. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can get that word out. Describe the partners, their committed roles in planning and implementing the grant project. So they're committed here, and hopefully they understand they're committed. And lastly, how you provide effective and appropriate means to communicate. Next slide, please. Have a plan, tailor it to your audience. Here are ways to do that. Communicate project progress, solicit public input in a meaningful way means you listen, you write down what they're saying, you respond one way or the other to them on what their input is. Next slide, please. Wow, I went fast on this. Again, tailor Tailor your community involvement plan. Next slide, please. This is sample text that I highlighted that I think might be helpful for you to take a look at. Kind of an idea of how someone else put it in their application. Next slide, please. Best practices here, as stakeholder input is provided, catalog it, use it for reference when determining your redevelopment priorities. Next slide, please. And cleanup. Remember, if you're doing a cleanup application, public meeting is a requirement, and you need to follow the rules. This is all written in the guidelines, but start planning for that now. Talk to your consultant or whomever about a draft analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives for your cleanup site. And with that, I'm passing it back to Maggie.
Great, thank you, Beth. Does anybody have any questions for Beth regarding community engagement, partnerships? Feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat. And before we get to the wrap up and a few last minute things, I just want to let you guys know that we really want to hear from you regarding today's webinar or the entire webinar series. We do value the feedback we receive from our participants, and it helps us shape education materials going forward. So if you can take just a few minutes to complete the feedback survey, we would really appreciate it. Next slide. So what are some key takeaways from today? I think one of the most significant ones is start gathering your data early. As we spend a lot of time talking about and viewing and seeing, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of data. Sometimes you might need to question the data, especially if you know something about your community that may not be in any of these tools or resources, and that's okay. But start that process now and start it early so you can start figuring out how you are going to weave that data and information into your community specific project. Start developing relationships with your community organizations and partners. Don't wait until tomorrow or next month. Start those today. Even if you just start an initial list today, that will really help you, in the months to come. The grant guidelines typically come out that late August, anywhere from late August to that early October timeframe. And you may think you have some time, but trust us, that's going to go by really fast. So just start those conversations and developing those relationships now. And something that I always like to say and recommend to people is to start with a great project, not a great grant. I think oftentimes we see, big dollar signs or, oh my gosh, there's all this money. Yeah, I'm going to apply for this and I'll figure out how to use it at some point. But really, to have a successful project, to build a successful brownfield programs, you really want to start there. I think Danielle and Jason touched on it during the panel of how to incorporate that data. Make sure the data works for you. I mean, even if your community or your target area has some really great demographic or other data, but if that data doesn't support your project goals, or even the impacted sensitive populations, don't include it because it doesn't fall in line with your project. So really understanding what type of brownfields project you have, what your goals are, how you're going to meet those goals, will really set you up for a very strong, competitive, and hopefully successful grant application. Next slide. A lot of this information can seem overwhelming, the information presented today as well as in the previous webinars, but just remember, you've got a Fred with TAB, whether, we can help you if you're just starting to establish or trying to figure out, okay, gosh, what do I want my geographic area to be in my target area? And do I have sites? Reached out to TAB. We can help you with that. Danielle is a TAB partner. And so we can utilize, if she's available, how she's available, we can utilize her if you'd like, a little bit of one-on-one navigating the tools and really trying to understand the data and things like that. That is an area that we can help you with. We can help you start creating that great project and that great narrative. If you don't know where to begin with community outreach or input for your particular area or region, reach out to us. We can have conversations about what that looks like for you and your grant project. Next slide. There are 6 TAB providers to provide these level of services all across the US. And so here's just a map and kind of shows who to connect with for if you're located in Wisconsin, that would be KSU TAB. If you're located in Alabama or Georgia, you would be reaching out to ICMA. But reach out to your TAB providers. We can all provide the same level of support and services for grant applications. Next slide. And just a couple reminders, we touched on the TAB Easy grant writing tool in our second webinar, but that is a free online tool available for anyone to use that creates templates and an outline for all of the US EPA Brownfield grants. You can also access helpful hints and some other tips through the TAB Easy tool. We also house several examples of past successful grant applications. So if you want to read and look how to incorporate data, this is a good place to start. If you want some ideas for maybe partnering, how did other successful applicants demonstrate their community engagement involvement plan? Who did they tap into as partners? Reviewing past successful applications is a great resource. Next slide. And in addition to successful grant applications, we also have a lot of other resources available online, looking at last year's guidelines as a place to start to kind of get your mind around what the criteria and the information that you are going to need and to gather. The guidelines change slightly from year to year, but the majority, the bulk of it doesn't, because it's written in statute. So you always need to have, your geographic area. You need to have your target area. You need to have, again, a project. You need to have brownfield sites to begin with. So you can visit our website. If you typed in FY23 in the search bar, it's going to pull up all of the grant resources we had for last year. We'll do the same thing this year when the new grant guidelines come out. We will put up all the resources for fiscal year 24. TAB providers can also review draft applications when you get to that point. If you are a past applicant and say you were unsuccessful and you are looking to apply again this year, reach out to the TABs early. We can do reviews now. We can take a look at your unsuccessful application and highlight and point out maybe some key areas that you can be focusing on over the next few months to really get your application to where it needs to be. So reach out to your TAB providers. We can do that. Next slide. And again, just another shameless plug for our evaluation survey. Not only do we use this information, like I said, to inform future offerings, but it's also a way for us to show EPA that the education we are providing is helpful, is beneficial, and so we do really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Next slide. And here's just the contact information for all of the presenters today. Feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, and if we can't help you, we can connect you with somebody who definitely can. Next slide. And that is what we have for today's webinar. We hope to see you in the next couple weeks as we wrap up the series. Next week, Scott Nightingale, my colleague, will guide us through budget tasks and programmatic capability. And then we will conclude the series on May 25th by helping you figure out how to tie all this information together. We know it's a lot and it can sometimes be maybe a little overwhelming, and we hope that the information that we're providing and sharing with you now will help you get started. So that is.
Hey, Maggie, do you mind if I break in for a minute?
No, I was going to open it up to any final thoughts. Yeah, for our presenters, panelists. And again, we're kind of a smaller group. And so if any of our remaining participants do have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to raise your hand. We can call on you and we can continue some open dialogue if you'd like. So yeah, Beth, go ahead.
Just a couple things I was going to bring it out in my presentation, but then I talk too much and then I can't. But two things I was thinking, the community involvement plan, or that getting the approach to community engagement. If you're struggling with something like that, give us a call. That's what we're good at. I mean, trying to solve problems and maybe help you walk through that piece, or what may be possible stakeholders. Another was the visioning services that we can assist you with. If you want to do some of this outreach early now, I wouldn't go into the late summer months, but definitely if you're looking for assistance with TAB helping you come in and do some visioning and reuse, thinking about reuse with your community, we'd be more than happy to do so. And also, when you mentioned the grant review, we also can assist you with some grant strategy to a point. Of course, we can't write your grant, but we can maybe point out some things that you might have missed that you might really want to focus on in your grant application. So that's all I had.
Okay. Jason, Danielle, any final words of wisdom?
I think another good resource, and I can't talk highly enough about the assistance KSU has provided us in the past with reviewing our grants. So that's fantastic. But if you start early and start writing now, you can actually potentially run your grants by an EPA project manager ahead of time before they're open. And so they won't have the most up-to-date grant criteria review scoring, but they know how they've seen it in the past, and they can provide some input there as well. So I would take advantage of that. That has been invaluable in the past as well. It just requires you to get going earlier, that much sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will just reiterate, Maggie, what you're saying. And we do get a lot of those requests, and I get a call for a one-on-one. Can you help this community understand what their EJ screen results mean, how it weaves into their story, help navigate that, identify data sources. So happy to be there for that. And just remember to push with the story and then find the data that really supports it.
Great. Thank you. Well, yeah, I do not see any questions in the chat, nor do I see any hands raised. So I thank you all for your time today. And yeah, we hope to see you next week.